engages in studies on the nonprofit industry predicts that 100,000 charities are going to go out of business as a result of recession. That makes it very interesting because there's only about 1 million charities. Of the 1 million charities that are in existence currently in the U.S., only 397,000 of them have gross receipts in excess of $25,000. And 397, yeah, exactly. So what's really happening here, maybe you start hearing a couple of statistics, you can see ultimately the underlying current here is that there's a desire to create more regulation to make it harder for charities that don't really have some backbone to ultimately go out of existence, merge and consolidate. One of the things that I recently did, because I was in the charity creation business for so many years, and I had the idea for a long time, is I actually created a separate venture in Century City, which is an investment bank for mergers and acquisitions for nonprofit organizations. Bridgespan, which is a research group for nonprofit organizations studying sort of the macroeconomics of it, recently came out with a study saying, why are there no investment banks in the nonprofit community? Ironically, it was timed well with our launch of the venture. And the reason why investment banks don't exist because in the nonprofit community is because investment banks don't see money. And unfortunately, people here, especially the ones that deal regularly with nonprofits, and have seen some of the issues with lack of management, lack of business understanding, the nonprofit community is really in a crisis state, actually. So the IRS, and I'm going to talk a little bit more specifically about rule changes that they had, specifically with the revised Form 990 and the policies and procedures, ultimately sees it as a way to create more formalities and ultimately move out charities that are really not doing much and or merge them or consolidate the industry. Typically, I think Eric and Jennifer can hear me talk. I'm very open to questions. Doesn't mean I'll answer any of the questions, but feel free to ask questions as you're going along. To me, I look at it as a dialogue and a discussion. My area that I'm going to discuss today is policies of governance. And I don't pretend to be able to come in here and be able to tell you anything about the financial aspects of the return, but I'm going to talk about governance aspects, specifically dealing with Part 6 of the new form. I've also sort of compiled a little presentation outline. I also attached some exhibits that I thought were relevant. Maybe I'm going to be able to have time to discuss them, but if I don't, they're also relevant for you guys in terms of some materials that you can look at afterwards. So I'm going to start and go ahead with the outline here, and we'll sort of march through, and we'll see where we get. The new form, and this is sort of introduction for a couple of you who don't have a background. The new form 990 was introduced for the 2008 tax year, and the core part of the form is 11 pages, and it's got 16 schedules. There are several reasons why the IRS created a new form, and I've listed a couple of them out. Number one, I think one of the more obvious ones is to create transparency. The IRS, of course, has a belief that if the form was revised, there would be a way for people in the public, namely watchdog groups and also donors, to really be able to easily see what's happening with the organization without having to fumble around and go back to the 16th page and figure out what's going on. So on the first page, the IRS changed some things. The first part, they have a little bit of a snapshot where it tells you quickly certain key sort of data, if you will, about the organization. So again, enhancing transparency is an important reason why they changed the Form 990. Related to that is the idea that they want to discourage wrongdoing. And this is pretty important because the IRS is a reactive organization and it reacts to political pressure. And the political pressure comes from the public. The public talks to their congressman, and then Charles Grassley is going to then say, okay, well, let's take a look at this and see what we can do. The headlines that you see in the newspapers regarding nonprofit leaders and charities in general in terms of wrongdoing are particularly important in terms of damaging the reputation of the nonprofit sector. And for some reason, the American public has a tremendous vehemence for activities where somebody actually engages in wrongdoing when they're involved with a charity. It becomes a much bigger scandal than some of the other scandals that might be out there. So the IRS is particularly serious about catching wrongdoing, and this is one of the ways that they're going to be doing that. They're taking a more active role in terms of monitoring charities. Now, a little background in terms of legalities, and I'll just throw it out there. Who in California has jurisdiction over charities? What governmental agency? Does anybody know? And I'm talking about legal jurisdiction. Right. So the Attorney General, she had this little small raise. The Attorney General has total jurisdiction over charities and has the ability to do what? Has the ability to go after people that have mismanaged the funds of the charities or committed some sort of wrongdoing. The Attorney General is particularly short-handed. There are very few people on staff. So at the end of the day, what is the Attorney General really doing in terms of monitoring charities? It's hard to really say how they're really impacting the charity world, how they're really policing things. So the IRS looks at themselves, and they've taken a more vigilant attitude towards how they're going to regulate the charities that are in the United States. So I think the Form 990 is a very brave move. I think it's a bold move by the IRS. I wonder if they really should be pushing forward in this extreme way, because it sort of creates some confusion and ambiguity between federal and state agencies and who has authority over the organizations. That's sort of potentially a separate dialogue. The third reason why the IRS, and I've already alluded to it, why the IRS has changed the Form 990 is because the survival of charities is predominantly based upon what? Anybody know? It's money. That's it. So the charities that get the money are the ones that will survive. IRS's thinking is if we give money to those charities, let's make sure that the best charities. So let's have a form that really tries to emulate and get closest to being the quickest way for donors to be able to see whether the organization is doing, quote, good or not doing good, as the case may be. So that's a big part of their thinking. And I don't know if anybody heard of Charity Navigator by any chance? Never heard of Charity Navigator. Charity Navigator was founded by a very successful internet entrepreneur who decided to create his own business, which was really a nonprofit business, to actually go out and study charities and look at how effective are they at engaging in programs. A little bit higher version of the Better Business Bureau in essence, but to really grade them and make sure that the general public has a sense of how are these charities really performing. The next reason I think that the IRS wanted to change the IRS Form 990 is because there are watchdog groups out there. Anybody aware of these watchdog groups that are actually studying charities' activities? Charity Navigator, I wouldn't say necessarily qualifies as a watchdog group, but it could. There are a lot of watchdog groups that really are studying what charities are doing, and they're actually revealing that to the press, and of course, the minute the bad press happens, the charity is going to suffer immensely. So basically, the IRS is ruling through the concept that if the public has watchdog groups and gets involved, they can help regulate the charities themselves. Under Section 6104 of the Internal Revenue Code, there's a right to publicly inspect certain documents of the charities. So obviously, if the IRS has really pushed hard on the types of information that the public can look at, they feel like they're doing a lot towards their duties in terms of ensuring that the public has the right to understand what's going on in these organizations. So that's sort of some, in my opinion, big picture things in terms of the overall movement with the IRS Form 990.